All right, everybody ready? Here we go. I'll call this meeting to order. Got the thumbs up from Russell. Thank you very much. All right, this is a regular business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, November 7th. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish people. Hat Squalin, Queest, Luktamuk, Tlat, Squamish, Okmeo. I would like to advise folks that this council meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you do have any concerns about this, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. I'd also like to recognize that we have Mayor Herford and Councillor Greenlaw online calling in from Japan. Thank you very much for attending. For practical reasons, as acting mayor this month, I will sit in as chair to help facilitate the meeting. Could I please get an adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And the first item that we have on our agenda this evening is a delegation from the Economic Abuse Awareness Day. And I believe we have Michaela Mayer who's joining us virtually. Let's bring her up. No? Apparently she is not here. We do have some, oh, she is here now. Great. We'll bring her in. Hi there, Michaela. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We are now on item 3, which is a delegation and request for proclamation for Economic Abuse Awareness Day. So I'll pass it over to you for your presentation or discussion. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michaela Mayer. I go by she, her, and I am calling in actually from the unceded territory of many nations, amongst them the Haudenosaunee and Mohawk, also known as Montreal, Quebec. I am the Director of Policy at the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, which is based in Ottawa. We are a national organization and actually one of the only organizations in Canada that are specifically working on or in the context of economic abuse within intimate partner violence and domestic violence. And so, yeah, it's one of those forms that is generally acknowledged also in the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence as a form of domestic violence. However, it's very understudied and a lot of times not very well known, even though some of our research suggests that it's like findings are pretty similar to those compared to those in the UK and also in the US, that almost 95% of domestic abuse survivors are also experiencing economic abuse. So it's a very prevalent form of abuse. And what it basically means is that it's basically a tactic by an abusive partner to limit the financial autonomy of someone. Because of course, it's a quite effective way of like coercive controlling behavior. If you limit somebody's access to finances, they're very dependent, right, and can't leave. And we hear from women that it's really also one of the main reasons, so access to financial resources, that women stay in abusive situations. And so as our organization, we're working a lot on bringing awareness to that topic. And specifically during the month of November, we have our annual Help Us Rise campaign. And we're really wanting to promote and advocate to address economic abuse. And part of it is also that we're like proclaiming November 26th as Economic Abuse Awareness Day to really bring, again, awareness to that specific issue that is oftentimes overlooked. We're advocating with municipalities, the federal government, the provincial government, to really fund more research on that, collect data, which is currently not being done by Statistics Canada, and to really address the systemic barriers that a lot of the women are facing when it comes to basically getting rid of economic abuse. So in that sense, we're also asking different municipalities to proclaim November 26th as Economic Abuse Awareness Day, to bring awareness about this issue, and show always your solidarity with the survivors in your communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Meyer, for being here and bringing attention to this really important issue. Council, any questions for Ms. Meyer this evening? I'm not seeing any. There's a motion for consideration moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor Pettingill. Would anybody like to speak to it? Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Just like to say it's unfortunate that we have to, consider this sort of resolution, but given the opportunity and the need to do so, I'm glad that we can support it. It's important work, and thank you very much for the work you're doing, and happy to support this request.
Thank you.
Lauren, did you pop up in an interest to speak to this motion? Go ahead.
I did. I've actually been thinking about this recently. Sorry, I'm going through a subway station right now. But because of the affordability crisis that we have in Squamish, how many people are stuck in abusive relationships and can't get out. So I'm very happy to support this motion on the floor. Yeah, thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. It means a lot.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being here and again raising awareness on this important issue. Some of the stats in the submission that you made to council in advance are really eye-opening. 84% of victims, abusers have built up debt under their names. Like to work out from under that is crippling for somebody who is already trying to overcome the emotional and physical abuse of a relationship. To then try and restart on a financial edge is just so overwhelming, and especially as Councillor Greenlaw mentioned, in a time and place where the cost of living is so high, especially in Squamish, we know that this is particularly poignant in our community. So happy to support the motion on the floor. I will call the question because we have two folks online. I'll just call for those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Ms. Meyer, for being here.
Thank you so much.
Next on our agenda is consideration of unscheduled public attendance. That is anybody who is here who has a matter that they think is urgent and cannot wait 2 weeks and would like to speak to council on that matter. Please come forward to the podium, provide your name, the neighborhood in which you're here, and the reason why you think your matter is urgent.
Hello, my name is Malika and I'm coming from the Highlands, and I'm here speaking from my seat of sky and was hoping to speak, I don't know if I do that now or later, on the wood fiber development permit that's being discussed tonight.
So this is your opportunity to express to council what it is that you'd like to speak about and why you think it needs to be discussed at this meeting.
Okay.
So not the actual content of what it is that you're trying to present, and then council will vote on whether they will hear that this evening or at a later date.
Okay. Hoping to ask council to refer this back to staff to allow for more time for public review before the permit is considered. Given the significant public interest in wood fiber LNG and the ongoing opposition to it, upon initial review, we're concerned about the light pollution and the impact on nearby wildlife and ecosystems, and we believe this deserves more attention and oversight, but we would need more than a day to review the permit application, identify concerns, and understand this process and the limitations that council has with regard to the permit. Yeah.
Thank you for making your submission. Thank you for speaking. I know it is not always the most welcoming location to come up and speak, so thank you for being here. Council, so this is regarding item, let's see if I have my numbers right, 9C3, the development permit DP 000599 for wood fiber LNG. And our decision at this point is whether we are willing to entertain hearing on this matter for the DP at this time, this evening. It is not our typical practice to receive public input on DPs. There's no requirement for a variant or no request for a variance here. So just keep that in mind. But it is at council's pleasure. If you would, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
I'd like to make the difficult recommendation that we keep in line with our normal hearing, our normal procedure for development permits, in that we do not have an opportunity for public hearing or public speaking for a development permit. I do absolutely understand the importance of the work that My Sea to Sky is doing, and absolutely admire you for coming here and requesting. But I think that it is important that we keep our procedures in line with what we regularly do. Thanks.
Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit torn here. I understand what my colleague is saying. I guess the request here, though, or it sounds like to me, is to look at or give. It sounds like the focus is on, the public to understand the DPA guidelines and identify areas of inconsistency there, which is a bit different than just sort of public's perception of a project like we'll have with the public hearing. And so that's where I'm struggling a little bit. There's a bit of a gray area there.
So I did hear the general skeleton of emotion that came from Councillor Hamilton. Would you like to refine that, and we get a seconder?
Okay, so I will clarify the motion that we deny the request to hear from the public on the wood fiber DP, this evening's wood fiber DP.
Seconded by Councillor French. Would anybody else like to speak to it this evening? Go ahead, Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. And normally, I'm a big fan of hearing unscheduled public attendance when brave folks come before us and make the request. And in this particular case, I'm supporting the motion because we have a procedure bylaw, and we have a traditional way of handling development permits. And tonight, I don't wish to deviate from that. I support our procedure bylaw. I support the way we handle DPs. And while I wish I could hear from the delegation, I think it's more important for me to support this motion.
Thank you. I will also be supporting the motion on the floor. We have received written correspondence from My Sea to Sky, as well as a few others with respect to this DP. As mentioned, it's not our typical procedure to allow folks to speak if there's no variance. If there's a variance or some other sort of leeway in terms of the discretion that council has with respect to a development permit, then it's typical that we would open that opportunity. But the reality is that we have very limited discretion on what's before us this evening. And so I don't want to give false impressions on where we actually have the opportunity to provide or respond to public comment. With that, I will call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Any other requests for consideration of unscheduled public attendance this evening? Not seeing any. All right, we will move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is a public hearing. This is for District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw number 220-2011, Amendment Bylaw Affordable Housing Public Service number 3018-2023. As staff get set up, I will read my very long script here. This public hearing is being held pursuant to the Local Government Act requirements to allow public to present and to provide submissions to council respecting the proposed bylaws. That is District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw number 220-2011, Amendment Bylaw Affordable Housing and Public Service number 3018-2023. Everyone present will be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or provide a written submission. We want to ensure that no one is discouraged or prevented from making their views known, whether speaking in favor or against the proposed zoning amendment. Please ensure that your remarks are relevant to the matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Please note that the public hearing is not an opportunity for members of the public to have their questions answered by staff or council. Any questions or points of clarification can be directed to staff by contacting the planning department directly. Members of council may ask clarifying questions following presentations. Council is here to listen and will not debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with the public or each other during the public hearing. Please note that this public hearing is being recorded and web streamed live, and the recording will be posted to the district website. Media are often present at public hearings. Hey, Andrew. And the public should feel free to advise the media if they don't want their picture taken. Up to and as part of this hearing, the public has had the opportunity to make submissions to council. If any submissions were received, they are available for review and comment and have been included as part of staff's report. Any submissions received after the agenda was published have been added to the electronic agenda and to the electronic public hearing package available on the district website. Any submissions made during the hearing can be reviewed during the hearing by viewing the electronic agenda, and submissions will be uploaded by staff as they are received. We are trying to make this hearing a safe space for everyone to voice their opinion without interference from others. Therefore, I ask that the members of the public maintain order and quiet during the hearing. Please do not applaud or interrupt any speech or actions of members of council or any other person addressing council. I will now turn it over to the planning department and Mr. Daly to outline the bylaw that is being proposed.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Daly, planner with Community Planning, and I'm here tonight to present the Affordable Housing and Public Service Zoning Bylaw amendments for a public hearing. At the October 17th, 2023 regular council meeting, council gave Bylaw 3018 first and second reading and scheduled a public hearing for this evening. Based on provincial targets identified in the District of Squamish 2023 Housing Needs Report, 9,600 new housing units will be required in Squamish by 2036. 6,840 of these will be required by 2031. Of those 6,840 units, 42% will need to be affordable to households earning below $70,000 a year. One way to increase supply is to remove density limitations for affordable housing projects from the zoning bylaw so they can more viably be established across the community. Bylaw 3018 proposes to replace Section 4.49 in the General Regulations section of the zoning bylaw with a new general regulation related to affordable housing. These general regulations would allow for affordable housing in any zone where residential is a principal use, allow for the height of a building where all of the units are secured as affordable housing to increase to 23 meters or 6 stories, exempt affordable housing buildings from lot coverage, apply a parking requirement of 1 space per dwelling unit for affordable housing units, amend Section 4.25, which regulates gross floor area calculation to exempt gross floor area used for affordable housing from that calculation. And separately, there's an amendment proposed to the general regulations regarding height of buildings and structures to apply a maximum building height of 26.5 meters or 8 stories, whichever is less, in any zone that may permit a taller building height, as this is currently the tallest building height that the District of Squamish Fire Department can safely fight a fire in. As noted on the screen, there are a few zones where that would be relevant. Staff have included conditions of use clarifying that affordable housing use and public service use is not permitted at densities higher than existing zoning if the property is located in a debris flow hazard area, restricted densification area, or limited densification area. An additional condition is included to clarify that affordable housing use and public service use on a property located in a conditional densification area is permitted if the specific conditions identified in the OCP are met. These conditions have been brought into the zoning bylaw amendment number 3018 for clarity. The amendments proposed as part of bylaw 2976, which were formerly noted as the P2 amendments, have been included as part of this bylaw. These include a revised definition of public service to include services provided by the provincial or federal government and includes affordable housing provided by a government agency or nonprofit agency. The amendment also proposes to add neighborhood commercial as an accessory use in the P2 zone. Council asked for some visualizations from staff to attempt to illustrate what these proposed amendments may look like on a typical RS1 lot. It would require upwards of 6 typical RS1 lots to be consolidated to accommodate the required parking for a 40-unit building. A building with fewer than 40 units would not likely require the maximum 23-meter height. In discussions with the Squamish Community Housing Society, affordable housing developments under 6 stories do not typically receive financing as they do not contain enough units to make the project financially viable. As an example, the Spirit Creek Affordable Housing Building, which opened in 2023, has 76 units and is 5 stories in height. This was constructed on a 5,300 square meter parcel, which would be roughly the equivalent area of 8 typical RS1 lots. Given the current market value of RS1 zone properties, it is unlikely that an affordable rental housing project would be acquiring multiple RS1 lots and taking advantage of the relaxations proposed in this zoning bylaw amendment. The intention behind the amendments included in Bylaw 3018 are to remove density limitations in the zoning bylaw and eliminate the rezoning process that is often required for these projects. This could save 6 months to a year in the development process and allow for affordable rental projects to be delivered to the market faster. The blanket rezoning for residential zones to allow for viable affordable housing projects will provide a significant advantage to nonprofits and government agencies in delivering affordable housing in any Squamish neighborhood. Planning staff held an open house on the proposed affordable housing amendments for the general public on September 20th, 2023. For clarity, this was on the previous amendment that didn't include the conditions related to flood hazard and debris flow hazard. That's the only difference between these bylaw amendments. This event was well attended. Approximately 20 members of the public were in attendance. Staff outlined the proposed amendments and associated rationale and took clarifying questions from the public, then allowed for an open discussion to occur. The majority of those in attendance were property owners who agreed there is a need for affordable housing, but were concerned about the neighborhood impacts associated with allowing buildings up to 6 stories with a reduced parking standard in all residential zones. Overall, the conversation was productive and informative for staff and attendees. Staff clarified that the amendments were targeting publicly funded non-market rental projects and are relying on the district's partnerships with community housing providers to resolve location and massing issues rather than restricting development through zoning. Attendees highlighted the need for clarity in communicating with the public to highlight the objectives of this amendment. There were a number of concerns that the public highlighted, including the impact of 6-story buildings on adjacent properties, including shade and effect on neighborhood character, effect on property values, and setting a precedent for building height in a low-density neighborhood. Concerns regarding excess parking from the future residential buildings, whether existing infrastructure has the capacity for this type of development, concerns around a blanket zoning amendment approach as opposed to spot zoning in certain locations to try out the regulations and ensure there are no unintended consequences. There were also a number of attendees who were supportive of the amendments, including one resident who felt that they should provide further relaxations to make these developments as viable as possible. Notice of the public hearing was advertised in the October 26th and November 2nd editions of the Squamish Chief newspaper. I believe 6 or 7 comments were received prior to the public hearing this evening. 2 were supportive of the amendments. The one suggested that the relaxations should go further. The remainder of the comments were not supportive of the proposed amendments. So following the public hearing, staff recommend that bylaw 3018 be given 3rd reading. And that concludes my presentations. I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Daly. I'll go to council first if council has any questions at this point in time. We have seen this a few times, and so not seeing any clarifying questions. So we'll now move to an opportunity to hear from the public. And so the public will be given an opportunity to speak and make their submissions. I do have a list of names here, and I will call on those individuals to the podium first. After these speakers, I'll call for any other interested parties to speak, and then you simply need to raise your hand and wait to be recognized. For all speakers, please approach the podium and start your remarks by clearly stating your name and neighborhood. Please note that speakers will be given up to 5 minutes to address council in order that everyone has an opportunity to speak to council. But if you run out of time in your 5 minutes and you want to come up and speak again, you're more than welcome to. Details to participate via telephone or WebEx are displayed on the screen for those who have logged in from your computers or are watching the live stream of the meeting. Instructions are also included on the district website. To get on the speakers list, if you've joined by telephone, please raise your hand by dialing *3, or if you're on WebEx on a computer or cell phone app, by opening the participant panel and by clicking on the hand icon. Please note that there will be a moderator who will communicate with speakers. When it is your turn to speak, you'll receive a voice prompt via telephone or a dialog box via WebEx. Please remember to put your hand down after you have finished speaking. Again, that's *3 on the telephone or by clicking the hand icon on WebEx so that we know that you have completed your comments. If you have already spoken and then you wish to speak again to provide more or new comments, you can raise your hand again or add your name to the speakers list. And once I've indicated that all speakers have been offered a chance to speak, then we can come back around. So I will begin. The first person on my list is Toby Ford Kelsey. If you could come up, make your comments. Name, residential neighborhood.
Good morning, Mayor in Japan, and good evening, everybody else. I'm Toby Ford Kelsey, currently living in Crumpet Woods. Was there something else I was supposed to say?
You've got it.
So I wrote a submission, which is in the addenda or whatever it is. I hope it's self-explanatory, but I just want to work through it briefly because I think it's maybe more nuanced than some of the arguments people would present in relation to this. Generally, when I look at things that council are doing, I look for kind of economic literacy, and I feel that there are aspects of this which are kind of economically illiterate. If I understand correctly, what's happening here is an exception to the kind of norm of municipal behavior. So normally people come to a town, they buy property, they hopefully look at the zoning for the property they're buying, and they have some expectation of what the future will hold for the neighborhood they've bought into. And when a municipality rezones, which is a very dramatic thing to do to allow density or something else, then there's usually some economic impact for the people in that neighborhood. There will be some adverse effect that maybe they don't want, larger buildings around them. But on the other hand, they may have the opportunity to sell their properties at a higher price, and that's kind of a compensatory thing. And that is the normal run of municipal life, as I understand it. Maybe somebody will contradict me, but that's, to me, what I understand to be normal. What's happening in this case is you propose to create an exemption for one particular buyer. So you're creating an exemption for I assume kind of non-profits. It's not kind of unclear to me what the entities are that will be buying, but they will be buying with the intention of creating these very large affordable housing properties. And necessarily, and I hope this is clear in the presentation, they will be looking for land that is low in value because they're trying to build affordable housing. Therefore, they're trying to keep their costs as low as possible. So the neighborhoods that are going to be built on for affordable housing are necessarily the lower land price neighborhoods in Squamish. They're going to be places like Valleycliff or Dentville. I thought Brackendale, but now I see Brackendale has kind of a flood exemption or something. But again, maybe I didn't understand that properly. But it seems to me the neighborhoods that are going to be affected by this are the same neighborhoods where typically the people who bought there are first-time single-family home buyers, people who maybe owned a townhouse before or lived somewhere else in BC, or some circumstance that just allowed them to buy a single-family home, and maybe they've struggled a lot to get to that point. Maybe they've spent a long time saving to that point. They've bought a property of that type, and now they find themselves in a neighborhood which is changing character. But there's no offsetting benefit to them. They're not going to see land values rising because you are restricting this to a single type of buyer. So they are going to see their neighborhood change. And in some cases, people are probably going to feel that their very specific location is blighted by having a 5-story or 6-story, I've lost track, 8-story building put next to them. And then in fact, not only will they not see land prices go up, but most likely people who are specifically in that circumstance will see their house price drop dramatically. So where this isn't, of course, going to happen is in the nicer parts of, what are perceived as the nicer parts of town, the Benchlands, the, University Heights, Garibaldi Highlands, Crumpet Woods, where I currently live. These are not areas that are going to be affected because land prices are higher. So essentially, this is regressive. This is a regressive policy. And I think it's unfair. I think if you want to do this, and I mean, there are arguments for and against density, but if you want to do this, it should just be done across the board. It should be for all classes of buyer. Like anybody who wants to build density should be given that opportunity. and then that is fair. That's a fair playing field, and that's fair on the people fair on homeowners who've taken the risk on this town. I'll just add a couple of. That's what I hope I've said. I've rephrased what I wrote, but I hope that conveys what I wrote. I just want to add a couple of other points quickly. It
45
seems
seconds.
Yeah. First one, I think this kind of proposal will be gamed by people. I think people will find the suggestion was this probably wouldn't happen in a lot of neighborhoods because it wouldn't be affordable. I think people will find ways to game it in some way. They'll find a way around. There'll be loopholes. There'll be ways to do this. And secondly, the province has just in the last few days made announcements like this. But as far as I understand it, opening density up to all kinds of buyers, it seems to me you should scrap this proposal entirely until you've really looked at what the province is proposing and bringing your proposal in line with theirs. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission. We'll go to the next person on my list is David Lastman. Please come up.
Yes, my name is David Lastman. I live in Brackendale. I have just a couple of short comments to make. I like the phrase that Sarah Ellis used, which is non-market housing. I think that's more genuine than calling it affordable housing. Experiences in other areas, for example, cities like Chicago, have found that it is best not to concentrate housing projects in a single area. So it would be better if you're going to have these kind of projects that they should be dispersed throughout the community and not centered in one area. For me, common decency would require a buffer between an existing home and one of these kind of projects. I don't see these things being addressed by this bylaw, but it may be covered in some other bylaw. So what this is really about is actually really a global issue, which is all around the world. Governments are trying to find a way to build housing for people who can't afford housing. That's what this is really about. And so if you have a problem and you want to find a real solution to that problem, right? You have to find out what's the cause of the problem? What's the real source of the problem? And so I would like to bring to your attention a couple of questions which are not really being addressed anywhere on the TV or in public, right? First, why is housing expensive? Why is it so expensive? What are the costs involved? It would be nice to see a pie chart showing what percentage of a typical unit in Squamish is, for the foundation, what percentage is for land and so on and so forth. What percentage of the cost is for dealing with the district's bylaws and so on. So why is housing expensive is like a crucial question. The other related question is, why can families no longer afford fundamental necessities like food and housing? This is really the crux of the matter. And it's a global issue. It's not just Squamish or BC or Canada. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lastman, for your submission this evening. Next on my list is Jerry LaJacco. Please come up.
Hi, yes, I'm Jerry LaJacco, and I live in Westlake. I have a question, which I know won't be answered tonight, but hopefully eventually would be. The affordable housing that the new or the amended bylaw would allow, will it allow for buildings in which all of the units are public service housing, and as well buildings in which only a portion of the units or a percentage of the units are public service housing? So I'm thinking, a building that is where all the units are affordable housing or public service housing subsidized by province, federal, or the municipality, Squamish Housing Authority, or something along the lines of the Anthem development on Centennial, where there are 22 units that will be listed as or held as affordable housing in perpetuity, according to the wage scale that you've got in the schedule on that permit. So that's basically my question. Is it just for public service housing or for developments that include a small or some percentage of public service housing? Thank you.
Thank you for your submission. We will do 2 more and then we'll go to council for any clarifying questions. The next person on my list is Kirby Brown. Please come up.
Kirby Brown of Brackendale. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for hearing my comments and the thoughtful comments before me. I am the chair of Squamish Community Housing, or Housing Squamish, and I'm speaking tonight in support of the bylaw, the amended bylaws. As I think the previous speakers mentioned directly or indirectly, creating affordable housing may have already escaped us, but creating a sufficient supply of housing so that in the future, generations won't have the same struggles that our community is facing today is what's important. Council is limited in the tools that they can exercise. They don't own a lot of land, but you do have the ability to make amendments such as the one tonight that reduce costs for very specific uses on land, which is, I think, a very thoughtful amendment. I think it's well bounded by the community policies that exist today that make sure that all developments on any property reflect the zoning, the riparians, and the uses and purposes of the neighborhoods within which they're built. So I have no fears about lots of these buildings popping up in neighborhoods and shading other structures. What I think it does is clearly signals to senior government that Squamish is a town that is committed to trying to do what it can to solve a very complicated problem. And that signaling in and of itself is very worthwhile. Coming back to the bylaw amendment, we do need to look at broad strokes that allow us to take advantage of opportunities when and if they present themselves. And I have no illusion that there's going to be a lot of these developments available, given the restrictions that exist within the policies of this community that are in place to protect us from runaway and rampant development of all kinds. But it is the type of opportunity that we may live in now, meaning that currently there's an affordability crisis recognized by all levels of government, and all levels of government are stepping forward to add what they can. Bylaw amendments, zoning considerations, and at the more senior levels of government, funding. New funds are being created, it seems like every day, but and they are of substance, but we are competing against every other community in this country for federal funds and every other community in this province for provincial funds. And to be able to stand up a not-for-profit society that can go after these funds with rapidity and confidence that the district and the municipality is behind us in a meaningful way will allow us to go and access those funds that close the gap between unattainable and some approximation of affordability. If we're going to get housing built, we need bylaws and we need money, and one comes with the other. So I applaud this effort. I think it's thoughtful and well considered. So thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your submission this evening. Next on my list is Cameron Cope.
Good evening. My name is Cameron Cope. I live here in downtown Squamish with my family. I come to you today as a director of the Squamish Community Housing Society, a local builder, and a community member. From these lenses, I see the importance of this bylaw. This bylaw presents a significant opportunity. In doing so, it allows us to ensure we maintain a diverse community into the future, which I think we all agree is important. At the Housing Society, we're working on creating new affordable housing. It's just really tricky. I've read the bylaw and I believe it's going to help. I can tell you that having this bylaw in place will make it easier to gain project support, acquire funding, and ultimately create more affordable housing for the people of Squamish. Affordable housing belongs anywhere where the fundamentals of building work to build it. For the first time in decades, the federal and provincial governments are providing funds that are now becoming available. It's important that the district's development approval process is aligned with the needs of governments, nonprofits, and other partners to deliver affordable housing. This is why I urge you to give this bylaw third reading tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cope, for your submission this evening. We'll take a little pause to go to council to see if there's any clarifying questions at this point, and then we'll go back out to the public. Councillor French, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. And I wonder if staff could address the thought that we had a few moments ago about whether or not this move will allow for buildings with only a portion of government subsidies that are driven by a private developer. And I think I heard in your presentation words that answer the question. So maybe you could just give us a context.
Go ahead, Mr. Daly.
Yeah, through the chair. So it wouldn't prohibit developments where affordable housing is being proposed. If there's only a portion of the units that are secured as affordable housing, they wouldn't be eligible to get the height relaxations or lot coverage relaxations. They would only be exempt from gross floor area calculations, and they would get a parking relaxation depending on the unit type. So it has to be 100% of the units in a building has to be secured as affordable rental to secure all of those relaxations that are proposed.
Thanks, Chair.
Council, any further questions at this point? I had one just on following on Councillor French's. Can you just clarify what our definition is of affordable?
Let me just pull up the bylaw so I get it. Oops, my apologies. One moment.
I have another question. So maybe
Yeah, you're gonna. Sorry, it's loading. I thought I had it in here,
no,
but
it's all good. I'll ask you another question. Maybe Mr. Valeniskis can pull up the zoning bylaw definition of affordable housing. My other question is, I just want to ensure that even with these zoning changes, our DP guidelines and things like setbacks would still apply, correct?
That's correct.
So in terms of how we would, the interface of buildings with neighboring buildings, frontage improvements, all of those things would still be required.
Development permit for the form and character of the building would still be required. So obviously the building would have to meet all of the relevant DPA guidelines. And when a building permit is submitted, it triggers the subdivision and development control bylaw, which would be the opportunity for frontage improvements and things like that.
Okay, thank you. And then one further piece of clarification that I think there may have been some confusion. So that the proposal includes an amendment to the definition of public service to include affordable housing under that public service definition, but it's not necessarily a descriptor of who would be in the affordable housing units. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's tied to it being provided by a nonprofit or government agency.
Thank you very much.
I have the definition of affordable housing up now. So it's defined as non-market and core needs housing available at rental rates and purchase prices below market rates and prices to those of low and moderate incomes that is subject to a housing agreement between the district and a landowner pursuant to the Local Government Act that has some form of occupancy restrictions and or the rent or price charged to the occupant for the unit and is more clearly detailed in an affordable housing policy or a bylaw approved by council.
Thank you for the definition. Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if any consideration was given or why we don't see a suggestion to further reduce or remove parking restrictions for such proposals that would be downtown or on a key transit route or something.
Through the chair, staff thought it would be, given that this is going to be blanket zoning across the entire community, staff thought it was appropriate to reduce the parking standard to 1 stall per unit, and then allow the opportunity for a development variance permit to further reduce the parking if necessary, as a DP would be required for this form of development. So if, for example, the project was located in an area that you described and there is sufficient rationale to further reduce the parking, staff thought it would be appropriate to deal with that on a case-by-case basis through the variance process.
Thank you. Not seeing any further questions from council at this point. I'll go to our moderator and see if we have anybody online.
Thank you, Chair. There are people online. Nobody has their hand raised at this point.
So just a reminder for those folks who are online, or if you're calling in by telephone, it's *3 to raise your virtual telephone hand, or open the participant dialog box and raise your online virtual hand if you'd like to submit during this public hearing. Otherwise, I'll go back out to anybody in the audience who's here joining us this evening. If you haven't yet spoken and you'd like to speak to the bylaw that's under consideration. We'll go Ihor first. Please come forward. Yeah. Please state your name and the neighborhood in which you're coming from this evening.
My name is Ihor Zalubniak. I live in the Garibaldi Highlands. One of the things that I find has been perhaps overlooked in this process is the melding of owned units and rental units in the same building. And the reason that I suggest that is because what it does is it raises the specter of, I don't want to buy in this building because there's going to be rentals. And they're going to be rentals to people who can't afford rentals in normal buildings. Now, I don't share that particular view, but developers do. So how do we ameliorate that? How do we make a developer feel like my market value in this project isn't going to be diminished in any way by being forced to have rental units in that building? Thank you.
Thank you for your submission this evening. Gentleman in the back in the black, please come forward, your name and neighborhood.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Norton. I live in Valleycliff. I think that what I have to say echoes a lot of what the first gentleman said this evening. I think that the blanket nature of this legislation is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, and I don't think it's justified in being applied across all of Squamish. I think that it would be wise to make some initial steps to test and see how this legislation affects things, and I do not believe that it is integrated well in how the city of Squamish will be planned going forward. I think that it introduces an element of chaos that just doesn't add up. I think we've seen this with some of the developments that have gone on in downtown itself, so there are examples that already exist of this. Add that to the already crammed nature of our roads, which are not ready to support increased density, and I think we have a recipe for not the best things to happen. So those are my thoughts, and I will leave it at that.
Thank you for your submission this evening. Would anybody else like to speak to the bylaw? Please come forward, gentleman in the black jacket, and then we'll go to the gentleman in the blue.
Thank you, Council. My name is Chad Hooper. I live in North Yards. I just I'm listening to the suggestions of a reduction in parking, and it feels like we're putting the cart before the horse here. I mean, we live in Squamish, and we don't have much of a transit system in place. And I mean, myself, I lived in a quiet little cul-de-sac in North Yards, and now we've got rental units that have gone up where the forest was. And the previous council approved a height limit in the parking for 6'6", which doesn't fit. Well, the most popular vehicle in Squamish is 6'7". So now our quiet cul-de-sac is a parking lot. There's also retail spaces. It's a mixed-use building, which I get that makes sense, but there was no foresight put into the parking for those retail locations. So we're dealing with dangerous situations all the time where people are blocking the intersection, and it's an industrial area west of the train tracks there. So people come racing down there late for their shift at 7 in the morning. And I'll be taking my daughter to her swimming lesson, or trying to, and several times have almost been wiped out by somebody racing down there because you can't see them coming because of all the cars parked where they shouldn't be. I've talked to several of the tenants of the place and asked them, if because they do tend to park for days on end, and it's tough to get bylaws to do anything about it in a timely manner. And have talked to them, and they say, well, it's $100 for a parking spot, and they don't want to pay that. So it's like, well, okay. So anyways, it's just frustrating because we're stuck dealing with it. And it's sort of, I get the idea behind less parking. It's a great idea, but we don't have the services in place to support less parking. And Squamish is a community that needs vehicles to get around right now, unfortunately. If it was nice all the time, we could always ride bikes, would be great, but we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of winter, and it makes it hard. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission this evening. Yes, please come forward. Your name and your neighborhood.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Morel. I live in Valley Cliff, and I'm here representing just myself, speaking in support of this bylaw. We desperately need housing of all types, but affordable housing especially, and I'm heartened by this effort at removing the overhead and uncertainty of spot rezoning and allowing these developments to get started as quickly as possible. Building affordable housing is certainly difficult and complicated, and permitting should be as predictable and streamlined as possible. With legislation likely coming from the province allowing fourplex construction in all single-family home neighborhoods, I think the forms that this bylaw allows on existing RS1 lots will fit in well with that new legislation. It is very forward-looking. And I would echo Councillor Pettingill and urge Councillor to explore going further in reducing or removing parking requirements to help make as many of these projects as viable as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission this evening. I'll go back to the moderator and just see if there's anybody who's raised their hand online.
Thank you, Chair. No one online has their hand raised.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience like to speak at this time? Council, any further questions? Questions of clarification? Not seeing any. Yeah, Councillor Pettingill.
So we did have a question about sort of impacts or the tension between market ownership and rental in one of these buildings, as I understood it. But am I correct in thinking that this is proposed solely for below market, and so a tension between market and non-market would not exist in these?
That's correct.
Any further questions? Anybody else in the audience like to speak this evening? All right, I have a closing statement and we'll see how this goes. So if there are no further speakers, I would ask council if there are any further information that the planning department might provide in response to any comments or questions raised by members of the public at this point. Not seeing any. Now that I have heard from everyone on the speakers list and those who have raised their hands, it is a requirement that I ask 3 times if there is anyone else who wishes to speak before we can close this public hearing this evening. For the first time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission this evening? For a second time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission this evening? For those online, *3 or raise your hand in the panelist icon in WebEx. Just trying to stall here before I ask for a third time. Still not seeing anyone online, Robin? No. For a third and final time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission this evening? Not seeing any. So with no further submissions, please note that council members are not permitted to receive any further submissions or hear either a proponent or opponent to the zoning or to the application once the public hearing has been concluded. This means we can't speak to you out in the community or receive emails or phone calls on any of these bylaws until a decision on the bylaws has been made. Any and all communication from this point must be channeled to staff directly, please. If there are no further speakers, I declare the hearing closed. Thank you very much, everyone, for your coming this evening and for your submissions. All right, Council. I will move us along. We will consider third reading of that bylaw later on in the agenda, but we'll continue with the agenda as we have it in front of us because it's not too far down. So next up is the consent agenda. Would anybody like to remove anything from the consent agenda? Not seeing anybody want to remove anything from the consent agenda? No. Would anybody like to move the consent agenda as is? Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Any opposed? Motion carries. Consideration of council committee recommendations. I'll read these out one at a time. So these are recommendations from Committee of the Whole, October 24th, 2023. The first one is the West Coast Environmental Law, that council join the Sue Big Oil Campaign class action lawsuit and include $1 per resident in the 2025 budget. And that council request a copy of the R.V. Finley legal opinion from West Coast Environmental Law to be shared with council. Would you like me to call these separately, Councillor Hamilton? Yes. All right. So on the first portion of the motion, all those opposed, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor French, and Councillor Anderson oppose. Motion carries. On the second portion of the motion. Sorry, yes, Ms. Arthurs?
Could you repeat the vote?
Yeah. So Councillor Hamilton, Councillor French, and Councillor Anderson oppose. The motion carries. On the second portion, we have, yeah? Yeah. Do you want me to double check that Lauren is there? Councillor Greenlaw, can you either unmute yourself and or turn on your video just to confirm that you are present for the vote that we just had?
I'm here.
Thank you very much. All right, on the second portion of this motion, which is that council request a copy of the legal opinion from West Coast Environmental Law to be shared with council. All those, any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The second motion that we have for consideration from Committee of the Whole is on Brennan Park Recreation Center Phase 1 retrofit, that the District of Squamish received the report dated October 24th from Facilities Planning and Construction regarding the Brennan Park Rec Center Phase 1 retrofit, green and inclusive community building grants, and validation report, including Class C/B cost indications, and advance the project to the next cost update, Class A. Any moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Pettingill. Any opposed? Question? Comment from Councillor Pettingill. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd asked staff for a deeper understanding of the energy, the GHG analysis, and appreciate that. It had good detail. As I read it, though, it looks like we are comparing the 2022 versus previous GHGs, assuming 2022 like current before and after construction levels, but at that population. Whereas what we're meant to be doing is measuring the 2010 consumption, population, efficiency, and so on. And I don't know that that would have a big impact, but I just sort of wanted to flag that as much as possible when we're looking at our impacts. We need to be comparing to where we were in 2010 at that population, not skewing the numbers for today's population, because even though it's more challenging, that is the target we have committed to and we need to hit. And so just making sure that in the future we have that understanding to the degree it's possible would be helpful, but happy to support this.
Thank you. Any further comments? I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Innovation Roadmap on Rural Economic Diversification Infrastructure Program Application, that Council endorsed the draft District of Squamish Innovation Roadmap presented in the October 24th report from ECDEV, and approve that the District of Squamish funding application to the Rural ECDEV and Infrastructure Program to implement the District of Squamish Innovation Roadmap. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Proposed building bylaw updates, energy step code 3, zero carbon step code 4 option. That council receive the proposed building bylaw update report dated October 24th for information and direct staff to come back with a bylaw amendment reducing energy step code requirements by 1 level for any residential part 3 building if the development proposes to meet zero carbon step code level 4. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor French. Any comments? Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, just when the actual bylaw comes back to us, I would like to understand the impacts, if any, if the requirement was for the emissions level 4 to apply to commercial and residential in order to get the step 3 on residential. So if that can come back with the proposed bylaw, I may wish to propose something alternate, but happy to support this motion.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We are now on item 8A1, which is a third reading of the District of Zoning Bylaw number 220-2011, Amendment Bylaw Affordable Housing Public Service number 3018-2023. Mr. Daly is here. He was just sitting in the hot seat through the public hearing. I don't think he has an additional presentation at this time, but council, if you have any questions that will not present any new information since we closed the public hearing, what is your pleasure? Councillor Pettingill.
So process question, sometimes these bylaws can take a while after third reading to get adoption. Is there that sort of possible process delay, like, we need to go then for provincial approvals, or is adoption likely to come quickly after third reading?
Through the chair, it could be adopted at the next regular meeting. There's no conditions required or no higher level of government approval for this bylaw.
Go ahead, Ms. Arthurs.
Since this is a rezoning bylaw and there are no conditions or highways approvals, it could also be adopted tonight. Third and adoption on the same night. This is the only type of bylaw where you can do that.
Thank you. And to clarify, the reason why we might do that is if we just pass third reading and not adoption, we still can't talk about it out in the public. It risks putting the public hearing in jeopardy. And so one consideration would be to give it third reading and then adoption. But that is council consideration. Councillor Hamilton, please go ahead.
I would like to move third reading and adoption of the... Then I would like to move third reading, please.
Seconded by Councillor French. Who would like to speak to it this evening? Councillor Hamilton, go ahead.
I want to thank all the members of the public for writing in and coming in tonight. We've heard many sensible arguments on both sides of what is really a very difficult challenge for communities around BC and around the world to manage. And that is the challenge of creating affordable housing. I think that as one of our folks that came in and spoke said it very well, that everybody needs to find the piece that they can contribute. And this is one piece that local communities can contribute by making our bylaws and our zoning more amenable to affordable housing projects. So with that, I support this bylaw.
Thank you for your comments. We'll go to Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. And I will pile on with the acknowledgement and the thanks for those who participated in the public hearing. That podium can look very scary. I recognize that. And it really takes something to stand up and share your thoughts, share your fears, and share your opinions. So for those who did, thank you. So I'm speaking in favor of the bylaw amendment. I believe that it puts us in line with what the provincial government is expecting of communities across the province as we collectively work to address the housing shortage that exists not just in Squamish, but across all of BC. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor French. I have Mayor Herford, then Councillor Pettingill.
Yes, thank you. Speaking in support of the motion, this approach, I think, is entirely appropriate, and Unlike other zoning amendments where the potential is that it can be broadly used across the community, with the controls in the bylaw as to who and what product specifically this applies to, gives me comfort that that this is the right direction, along with our requirements of the legal agreements or the housing housing agreements with the proponents. So I'm confident that this is a path forward, and that staff has done due diligence to make sure that we are only putting these units in safe areas, and that we're protected, so we actually get the product that we're all collectively striving for. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. Councillor Pettingill, then Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thanks. I will support third reading. I think I do have some concerns about this, but I think it's, and one of the speakers spoke to this, it's important to signal to the province and the feds that we are willing and we want to do whatever it takes to do our part on the housing crisis that people are facing. And so I think sending that message to them is important, but also understanding that the different levels of government, from what I've seen, are working collaboratively together to orient these things towards transit, towards sort of holistic community solutions. But we need to remove those barriers and show that level, I think, of trust and desire to collaborate to get this to work. Where my hesitation is that there are certain areas, I think, far from services and not as close to transit, where, for my mind, building this requirement for parking and adding on this car dependency into what are supposed to be affordable units doesn't quite make sense to me. I would prefer to, and I'm also hesitant about requiring, the whole purpose of this is to remove barriers, but we're saying, well, if someone has a great downtown location, they want a parking variance, they can go through the variance process. And I would prefer to remove that block and maybe focus these to areas where we know we don't have to go through the variance and just out of the gate do a lower parking requirement. And maybe that'll come back for an amendment. But the reason, again, I am comfortable supporting this as it is to send that signal to the province and the feds that we want to solve this with you and want to plan these well with you. And I do feel that's very important. I do have comfort in there has to be a housing agreement. The parameters of what is entailed in our housing agreements is very clear. So these are not market driven. This is not market driven building. And so I think with that, there are enough checks and balances that give me comfort to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I will be a reluctant and nervous supporter of this staff recommendation. I'd like to make some observations about the community dialogue thus far. It's difficult to avoid. Our whole community are absorbed in issues of growth. Firstly, the label NIMBYism. I think we should be very careful, all of us in the community, in how we apply this. One of the outcomes of it is potentially bad engagement and bad planning outcomes. And I could point to examples. It is really not very useful in a good community dialogue to be using that label against neighborhoods. It's going to lead to missteps or missed engagement needs. I also noticed that many of the people are adding to the debate are referring to city contexts, big city contexts. We have a Squamish Valley with unique circumstances, and this is just too little appreciated too often. And I also am concerned that the provincial government initiatives are oriented around big city contexts. It is this month 20 years exactly since Smart Growth BC and UBC introduced smart growth principles to Squamish. And they included good jobs are close to home. Also part of our context here, complete community, not only at a neighborhood level, but at a community and a regional level. We're a commuting center. It's a regional context to that. And everyone has a voice was a third principle that speaks to the importance of engagement. We have 2 posters up on the wall speaking to council priorities, connected and livable community, amenities. being prepared for the future, jobs, and economy. What I'm pointing to here is that we need to look at this and read the Housing Needs Report of last April in an integrated view. And this includes, or there's ways to do this, and I think at our neighborhood level, we need to focus on our neighborhood plans, ongoing and making sure they work. It's at the neighborhood plan level that we can address parking and understand the parking issues. Roads, we have 1940s and 1960s roads that will not handle the density that is being proposed sometimes. And we have experience with this already. Amenities, we don't have an adequate plan for our needs community-wide. Family and neighbors, we make investments in our neighborhoods, in our homes. The neighborhood plans are a place where we can understand those and hear concerns regarding neighborhood values and the investments that families make and that we all make in our neighborhoods that may be at risk. Finally, I wish to acknowledge the couple of comments from our presenters, Mr. Kirby Brown on affordability and the importance of looking long-term at affordability and the supply context of that. I think that's very important. And also for Mr. Cope, we need to be looking at the fundamentals of where building will work, and that's always going to be true, and we need all partners to help advise our course of action in this. But and in fact, to draw to a conclusion, I am nervous about a blanket application, and I do acknowledge the points that Mr. Toby Ford-Kelsey has made. I think they're valid, but I'm less nervous because I don't think that it's going to have outcomes that I'm hopeful that they're not going to be outcomes and uncertain consequences. But in fact, making the fundamentals of building work for affordable housing, it's going to involve a lot more discussion and information coming into it. So I'm hoping that our planning processes, our engagement processes, and our neighborhood plans will address this. So speaking in favor of the motion, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I'll make some comments and I'll come back to you, Councillor Pettingill. I saw your hand. I will also be supporting the motion on the floor for third reading for this rezoning bylaw. I think that this is an important step for us to be streamlining the process for building 100% affordable housing units in our community. I think that it is unlikely that we're going to see a 6-story building pop up in the middle of a RS1 single family home subdivision. We know that the land values are simply too high to make that work. But I think that it's important that we open up the opportunities in order to be able to support those who are trying to provide below market rental, below market affordable housing in our community in all ways, shapes, and forms that we can. This is one tool in our toolbox that we can streamline this process, and there are others coming. The province has recently announced changes to RS1 zoning to allow up to 4 units on every single RS1 zone. I think that this goes a step further. This does put us, I think, in a leading position in the province between the changes to the to the zoning that would allow 6-story affordable units across all residential, as well as including in the definition of public service, affordable housing. So there's some specific areas that are zoned for the use of public service, which now will allow affordable housing in those zones as well. City Hall is one example. You can think of a future City Hall that might have some affordable housing on top of it, and this enables that to happen without going through rezoning. I think that that is really important because we know the needs for housing in our community are so dire. The numbers out of our affordable housing report are staggering in terms of how we're actually going to make that happen. And I do not disagree with my council colleague that it's not housing above all else, that we have lots of other work to do and all the other components of making our community livable. And that work is moving in tandem with this. This is one piece of a very large puzzle, and I think it's an important step forward in order to support those who are trying to provide 100% affordable housing within our community. So I will go back to Councillor Pettingill. I saw your hand again.
Yeah, thanks. And I meant to mention parking, and a couple of commenters touched on that, so I didn't want to leave it unaddressed. And I think that there are some, we're in a friction point. We're in some degree of transition, both in terms of growth and I think for many people, or hopefully many more people, mode shift. But Canada, BC, and Squamish, we are facing significant growth across the board. And what we're talking about in this zoning is not going to be a deal breaker in terms of infrastructure. As part of our strategic plan, we also have master planning to make sure that we are planning for all of that growth, and we'll be updating some of our master plans and to make sure we're managing that as best we can as a community. In terms of the parking piece, we are doubling our transit funding in the next couple of years. We have moved up our downtown parking management work by a year, understanding that there are some real pain points that we want to deal with sooner rather than later. And I think it is worth acknowledging we are in a transition point. We understand that there's challenges for sure, but the fewer people that are dependent on vehicles, then our infrastructure costs come down, our livability goes up, and all these benefits. And it's not an easy puzzle to solve. And we are in that difficult, uncomfortable transition point. And so our task as a community is to find a way through all these things. So I don't want to dismiss some of the concerns. It's important to acknowledge them, but we are trying to, this project is not the solution or the problem. We are doing many other things in and above this to deal with some of these things. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Before I call the question, Councillor Greenlaw, I do just want to make sure that you are still here for the vote. If you can unmute yourself and just confirm that you're still present.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. I will call any opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor French.
I'd like to move adoption.
I will second that. Any comments? Y'all just spoke to it. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Council, I think we'll take just a short recess here to regroup before we move on to 8B. So let's come back in 10 minutes, please. Squamish regular business meeting on item 8B, which is adoption. I will just note that, give one quick second. I don't see Lauren Greenlaw, Councillor Greenlaw online. There she is. Lauren Greenlaw is back. Welcome back, Councillor Greenlaw. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So adoption of the District of Squamish Traffic Bylaw number 2220-2012, Amendment Bylaw number 3019-2023. Move adoption by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor French. Any comments? I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next is a suite of adoptions for the alternative approval process results, and I'll just pass it over to Ms. Arthurs just to give us a high-level overview of where we're at with this process.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Stoner. So I'm here today, Robin Arthurs, General Manager, Corporate Services, just to update Council that we went through the electoral approval for these 4 bylaws. And the bylaws had first readings in June and were sent to the ministry, the Inspector of Municipalities, for approval. And at that time, we did get the approval to move forward with the statutory process of advertising in the newspaper. Additionally to the statutory advertisements, we sent the opportunity for the AAP out with our district e-news and made the forms and information available on the district's website and through our social media as well. At the end of the deadline on October 23rd at 4:30, only one response form had been submitted, and that was for bylaw 2990, which is the Peninsula Main Arterial. And that is well below the 10% threshold of 1,809 to force a referendum on the bylaw. So because we did not receive the 10% to move to another voting opportunity, Council now is in the position to adopt the bylaws. And then once that happens, we send the bylaws off to the ministry again. And we as of tomorrow, if they're adopted, there's a 30-day quashing period, at which time there can be a challenge if there was a procedural misstep on the bylaws or the advertising. And after that 30 days, we send a certificate in, and the bylaws are considered ready to go to the SLRD for the next requisition to MFA.
Thank you for all the detail on the procedure for these bylaws. Council, any questions? All right, we'll move through these one at a time. So 8B2, District of Squamish Wastewater Treatment Plant Upsize Future Growth Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2988-2023, moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor French. Any comments? Yeah, Councillor Pettingill.
Just quickly, happy to support this, and some of these more than others. There's been quite a process, so glad to see these coming forward. And, we were speaking earlier about managing growth and planning for growth and dealing with it. And that's what we're seeing here. I think it's, I guess, sobering to look at, what it costs to support a community. But we understand, and we've been planning for this. I think some of the recent inflation has made this quite a bit harder. But we are developing and constantly improving and iterating on long-term plans to stay on top of this and to make sure that that infrastructure is there when the people are there. So glad to see us doing the hard work to move these things forward.
Thank you for your comments. And I'll just echo that these are important pieces of infrastructure to support our growing community, from the wastewater treatment plant to the second fire hall, flood protection for Jimmy Judd Slough, all really critical. So grateful that we are at this point where we can advance those loan authorizations and get that work done. I will call to question on this first one. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next one is the District of Squamish Jimmy Judd Slough Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2989-2023. Move adoption by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next one is the District of Squamish R20 Peninsula Main Arterial Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2990-2023. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Pettingill. Thank you very much. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And finally, the District of Squamish New Fire Hall number 2 Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2991-2023, moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next is section 9, number of staff reports. The first one that we have is around finalizing the green and inclusive community buildings grant process. We did have a staff report on this, and Bill Stoner is here to answer any questions, maybe give us a high-level overview. This is really administrative in nature, a process that's been ongoing for a while, but Mr. Stoner, I'll pass it over to you for any context you'd like to provide.
Yeah, thank you. Bill Stoner, General Manager of Community Services, and we're just looking today to finalize our green and inclusive building grant process. So this grant is being used for phase 1 renovation of Brennan Park. The grant has actually been approved. It was approved in May of 2022 and announced in July of 2022. What we don't yet have is a grant agreement signed. The reason is because we have 2 grants for the same building, and the grantor wanted to make sure that each grant was for a specific project and there was no overlap. The project team has worked hard with the grantor to get that defining line to ensure that there is no overlap between the grants, and apparently we have made some headway because we are now in a position where we can have a grant agreement signed. One of the last things we need is a resolution from council to that effect, and that I can read it out if you'd like.
That's all right. I think we all have it in our package. Thank you. Council, any questions for Mr. Stoner? This was a grant that was announced in 2021, and so it's taken us a while to get to the final approval process. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is a presentation by Community Planning and Sustainability. We have Food Waste Prevention and Diversion 2023 application for the 2024 grant funding. We have Ms. Barnes and Ms. Stone here with us this evening, and I'll pass it over to you, Ms. Barnes.
Hi, I'm Gabby Barnes, District of Squamish Economic Development Specialist. I'm joined by, do I need to add this up? Okay. I'm joined by Ms. Jen Stone, my colleague, District of Squamish Economic Development Specialist. So we're here today just to seek permission for endorsement to apply for a cold storage pilot program through the Environment, Climate Change Canada Food Waste Prevention and Diversion Research and Capacity Building Fund. So yeah, the objectives are to seek authorization in order to apply for this funding. The scope of this project, the budget for this initiative was proposed as part of the district's 2024 to 2028 financial plan. This fund offers up to $150,000 in non-repayable contributions to Canadian municipalities. It's 100% funded, no match funding is required. The application is due November 14th, so it's fast approaching, and confirmation of the grant is anticipated by April 2024. The background supporting this proposal for this project is backed in the recent Farm and Food Hub feasibility plan. The interim report is now being wrapped up. The finalized plan is anticipated by the end of this year. And these findings have highlighted cold storage as a high need in our region, as well as in the Squamish Valley Agricultural Plan and our emerging sector roadmap. The project proposal is piloting a cold storage program to optimize food waste prevention diversion in Squamish and Whistler in partnership with Squamish Climate Action Network. Squamish Climate Action Network would be the lead implementers. The goal of this project is to increase access for farmers to utilize reliable drop-off points with cold and freezer storage space. Also to test food processing equipment use to extend the life of surplus and seasonal foods, and to measure food waste prevention and diversion. The goal of completing a one-year pilot project is to then report on the scalability for this for the region. So tying into the Farm and Food Hub feasibility plan at the interim report, this gives an opportunity for an iterative process to see how potentially Farm Hub nodes as a model we're exploring may be scalable across the region. And that's my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Council, any questions for economic development this evening? Not seeing any. Crystal clear. It's always helpful when it's 100% funding, no match funding, and you're bringing us the potential of $150,000. It's always an easy ask. Councillor Hamilton?
I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor French. Would anybody like to speak to it? Councillor French, go ahead, then Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, these are really easy. Free money. That's what this is. If we get the grant, it's free money. It's a no-brainer. I totally support.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton, then Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, it's actually the first time I heard of refrigeration as a need in the Squamish Valley was from a resident on a sort of a side conversation, and I thought, really? That's something we need, but it certainly is. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I can't help observing as I read through the staff report how much of the framework that's here, the partnerships that are explained, and the infrastructure example, the cold storage, can be applied to the building materials recycling world. We have a lot of waste issues in the construction and demolition sector, and I would just like to encourage all of us to be inspired by this project. Much of it in its framework, goals, and inspiration can be directly transferred to that sector. It's also in need of attention, and I'd just like to pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, happy to support this. I hear too at the regional district the importance of this in the planning there, and speaking to some people in the community who are looking to do farming at different scales and looking at urban farming and so on, who aren't actually as aware of some of these endeavors, but are expressing to me the need for storage, cold storage, and so on. So the desire for this sort of infrastructure is definitely there. So I'm glad to see this work being done. Thank you.
Thank you. I will also be supporting the motion on the floor. I joke that it's free money. We've actually put in years of work to be able to get here. So I want to recognize the food charter, the Squamish Valley Ag Plan, the ongoing work around the Farm and Food Hub feasibility plan. Like all of these pieces come together in order to make this feel streamlined and easy. It hasn't necessarily been. There's been a lot of work that's been able to get us here. And so just a thanks to everybody who has supported along the way to get us to a point where we can actually be bringing in money to support our local farmers, to support our local food systems, and ensure that we're able to hopefully secure or reduce food waste and make sure that folks have access to healthy and plentiful food from local regions. So I will call to question. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much for being here this evening and for finding us free money. All right, we are now on to 9C, which is still some staff reports from Community Planning and Infrastructure, a series of development permits. So the first one is development permit number DP 0000600 37781 and 37790 2nd Avenue. We have Mr. Daly here in person and Mr. Valaniskis online. And when Mr. Daly has his presentation up, we'll pass it over to him.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you heard before, my name is Brian Daly. I'm a planner with Community Planning, and I will now be presenting a development permit application at 37781 and 37790 2nd Avenue, as well as a housing agreement bylaw associated with the permit. At the July 5th, 2022 regular council meeting, zoning bylaw amendment number 2864/2021 was adopted. This bylaw rezoned the subject property from light industrial to MUD 2 to facilitate the development of a 4-story mixed-use building. The subject property is vacant lot located at the corner of 2nd Avenue and Vancouver Street in the downtown south neighborhood. The development permit areas that are applicable to this property are Development Permit Area 2, Protection from Flood Hazard, Development Permit Area 3, Universal Guidelines, and Development Permit Area 7, Downtown South. This DP application seeks to establish the form and character of a 4-story mixed-use building. The building includes 216 square meters of employment space on the ground floor, 379 square meters of hotel space, and 292 square meters of outdoor amenity space on the 2nd floor, and 20 residential units on the 3rd and 4th floors. The residential unit mix includes 12 one-bedroom units, 4 two-bedroom units, 4 three-bedroom units, and 4 of these units will be secured as market rental housing in perpetuity through a housing agreement. The building is intended to be constructed to a net zero standard. The proposal meets the MUD 2 zoning. The building height is 15.6 meters. Parking is provided in a 1st-story parkade. 20 residential stalls are provided, which meets the zoning bylaw requirement. 5 of the required 12 non-residential parking spaces will be provided, and cash in lieu for the remaining 7 stalls in the amount of $210,000 will be provided, which meets the cash in lieu of providing non-residential parking stalls of the zoning bylaw. Class A bicycle parking stalls are provided in 2 bike rooms on the ground floor. A shared waste room is provided in the parkade. And as mentioned before, a shared outdoor amenity space is located on the 2nd story above the parkade. This amenity space includes plantings and furnishings for residential and commercial occupants to engage in social activities. The form and character of the building includes materials selected to reinforce the design concept. Red hardy panels reference the horizontal lap siding used in residential homes, but at a scale that relates to the large gable form. Metal mesh guardrails create variety while preserving the simple overall form. Planter pots are screened by the mesh guardrails, and vertical screen elements provide opportunities for climbing plants to become part of the building facade. A portion of the east elevation along 2nd Avenue has been reserved for public art. The intention is to provide a mural in this location pursuant to the land development agreement that was registered through the rezoning process. Landscaping includes native and near native planting materials that are low maintenance and drought tolerant. DP 600 was not presented to the advisory design panel for review as it was deemed a project of small enough scale and was sufficiently meeting the development permit area guidelines that it did not warrant a DP review. To inform the community per policy, the project was posted to the district's development showcase and a development proposal sign has been posted at the site. No comments or requests for public information meeting have been received to date. At the rezoning stage, 2 one-bedroom units, 1 two-bedroom unit, and 1 three-bedroom unit were secured as market rental. A housing agreement is required to secure these units as market rental in perpetuity, and that will be a consideration later on in the agenda this evening. Given that the proposal meets the DPA 3 and DPA 7 guidelines, staff recommend approval of a DP 600 subject to the registration of a housing agreement to secure the aforementioned units as market rental in perpetuity, the registration of a no gas covenant on title, and the payment of the cash in lieu for parking stalls in the amount of $210,000. And staff also recommend giving first 3 readings to the associated market rental housing agreement. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Council, any questions on this DP? Folks, a minute. I did have one. So I appreciate you spoke a little bit to why this didn't go to ADP. What is like the size criteria for a project to be small enough to not go to ADP?
So through you, Chair, this would qualify for a delegated development permit if less employment space was provided. So the mix and the delegation criteria is, I believe, 20 units and not more than 300 square meters of non-residential space. This is proposing 600 square meters of non-residential space and was highlighted by the applicant as a bit of an issue because this is something that the district would like to see more employment space, but they were sort of being penalized by having the process delayed by having to go to council. So staff felt that the form of the building was complementary to the existing character of the neighborhood and small enough in scale that we felt it would, and meeting the guidelines, that we felt it did not need to go to ADP review and could help further expedite the process of getting it to council.
We recently amended the delegation bylaw in terms of the size of employment space for delegated pieces or for delegated commercial space. It feels like it's when this has recently come through rezoning and has been approved by council. So I guess my question is, would it just require an additional change to the delegation bylaw in order to increase that square footage of employment space for it to be delegated to staff?
That's correct. Yes, it would require an increase in that amount.
Thank you. Council, any other questions? Not seeing any. What is your pleasure with respect to the staff recommendation in front of us? Councillor Hamilton.
I will move the staff recommendation. Yep, both points.
Thank you. Mayor Herford, was that you seconding, or do you want to just be put on the speaker's list? Okay, you're going to second and I'll put you on the speaker's list. Who would like to speak to it? Councillor Hamilton, and then we'll go to Mayor Herford.
Thanks very much. I think this is a great project. I particularly like the net zero component of the project and the combination of the increased employment space and the combination of a hotel with a residential space as well. I think it's a very creative project. And I look forward to seeing it come to fruition.
Thank you. Mayor Herford, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, just briefly, I'm in support of the recommendation, and the this project and has been really delivering what we've been asking for throughout various other developments. So it's great to see this move forward. I think this interesting little we'll call it a bit of a glitch where it would normally be into the delegated territory. I'm happy to see that staff found a creative way through there to sort of balance things out for this proponent that has been quite responsive and has put together quite a good project. So I'm looking forward to seeing this come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, did I see your hand? Go ahead, and then we'll go to Councillor Pine.
Thank you. Also speaking in favor of the staff recommendation. Just a small point regarding the issue of referral to the advisory design panel. I appreciate that it was not presented to the advisory design panel, according to staff, in order to expedite the process of bringing the project to us today. However, I think that due to the location and the building type and function, that it does merit consideration to have a review, and perhaps it might be possible, I don't know, to consider an alternative referral procedure. And I think back to the Squamish History Management Committee, where we didn't necessarily convene the committee when I was a member, but we did have referral via email, if you like. And I suggest this because I think that in this location, in this type of building, there's things to learn, if not to discuss, concerning colors, facade, integration of public art. So for the purposes of encouraging conversation and dialogue around these features of this building at this location, it might be considered some alternative efficient review process or opportunity for conversation among advisory design panel members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Penningill?
Yeah, happy to support this. I'm I'll echo some of the mayor's comments. I'm pleased to see a project come forward that is really paying attention to the council concerns, community concerns, and trying to address some of the challenges we're facing. And have been pleased to see some of the, and I know it's, change is challenging, but there's some really, I think, neat, positive change happening down there. And I hope to see this be a really sort of keystone part of that, really showing what is possible and things we need to achieve. And so hopefully other projects will take lessons and we'll see some of the same sorts of things come forward in terms of energy maintenance and thinking about how, the employment works together with residential and all these pieces. It's great to see the creativity here. Happy to support.
Thank you. I will also be supporting the motion on the floor. I think that this is in line with all the development permit guidelines that we do have and are appropriate to or applied to this project. A few highlights I think of this project are the net zero component. The employment commercial space on the ground floor really will really help to activate that particular area of downtown Squamish. The shift to second floor hotel and tourist accommodation, I think, is really insightful. We've had really significant challenges with second floor commercial, and I think that this will be a really appropriate use for that second floor employment space with a significant need that we know is in our community. We have one of the top 5 rates of accommodation use in our current hotels, and it's been really hard to build new purpose-built hotel accommodation. And so I think that this is a really valuable addition to the downtown core. And the ability to add 4 market rental units in a housing project of this size is actually really impressive. So I think that there's lots of wins here for the community and looking forward to seeing this project built. So I will call to question any opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next one on our agenda is development permit number DP 000-607 1050 Finch Drive for apartment number 1. And Mr. Daly, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I will now be presenting a development permit application at 1050 Finch Place, as well as 2 housing agreement bylaws associated with the permit. At the July 12, 2022 regular council meeting, council adopted zoning bylaw amendment 2811-2021. This rezoned the subject property from RS1 to comprehensive development zone number 101 to facilitate the development of 4 apartment buildings, 18 townhomes, and 20 duplexes. The subject property is located at 1050 at the east end of Finch Drive at 1050 Finch in the Loggers East neighborhood. The 2.4 hectare property is relatively flat on the western side of the property before rising very steeply to the east and the new extension of Finch Drive. Environmentally sensitive ditch runs along the portion of the western property line. The proposed apartment building is located on the southern portion of the site and is accessed off Finch Drive. There's also a 41-unit apartment building that is subject to development permit 000608, proposed on the northern portion of the site that would be accessed off Raven Drive. This DP application seeks to establish the form and character of a 44-unit rental apartment building, including 34 affordable rental units and 10 market rental units. The affordable unit mix consists of 19 one-bedrooms, 11 two-bedrooms, and 4 three-bedroom units. The market rental unit mix includes 4 one-bedroom, 3 two-bedroom, and 3 three-bedroom units. The proposal meets the CD 101 zoning. The building height is 22.5 meters. A public trail providing access to Raven Drive, as well as the Strata Park in the center of the site, is provided to the west of the building. Common outdoor amenity space is provided at the rear of the building, as well as on the rooftop adjacent to the shared indoor amenity space for the building. Parking meets the requirements of the CD 101 zone, which requires 1 stall per dwelling unit, regardless of the bedroom type, provided it's secured as rental. 35 stalls are provided within the 2-level parkade. The remaining 13 stalls are provided along Finch Place to the north of the building. A shared waste room is accessed through Finch Place between the entrances to the parkades. There is sufficient overhead clearance for garbage truck access and dumping of bins under the breezeway. The architecture mirrors the materiality and patterning of forest and rock, with the major east and west building faces blending into the natural environment surrounding them. A simple right angle L massing positions the building along the municipal road and over the access drive, while creating a private courtyard against the hill as it rises quickly to the east. A minimal color palette of green, wood tones, and dark charcoal echo the natural colors of forest and rock outcrops. The contrast responds to both the immediate environment as well as the overall regional landscape of the Squamish Valley. When concrete is in use at its base, it meets the ground plane with a variety of trees and understory vegetation to help lift the upper stories of the housing and make them blend more naturally into the forested hillside. Finally, a step-back building form gives relief to a breakdown in the overall massing, as well as an interlocking of the color and material palette. So landscaping is integrated with the wetland ecology. The landscape design makes use of native planting to soften the walls and edges of the sloped site. Connections to the trail experience are planted with larger scale plants, inviting users to explore the public right-of-way. Low plantings are combined with raised canopy of the site and provide a safe and inviting transition between public and private spaces. The bird and pollinator friendly design extends to the support of the planted environment and supports the non-human residents of the site and supporting the resilient biodiverse ecology. So this development permit was presented at the August 17th, 2023 ADP meeting. ADP reviewed the project and provided recommendations shown on the slide. Staff believe the applicants responded to the comments was sufficient and consistent with the DPA 3 guidelines. To inform the community per policy, the project was posted to the district's development showcase and a development sign was installed at the site. No comments or requests for public information meeting have been received to date. So at rezoning, 34 units were secured as affordable rental and 10 units were secured as market rental. Housing agreement bylaws are required to secure these units as rental housing in perpetuity. The slide shows a sample calculation of the monthly rent for the affordable rental units based on the 2021 taxation year. So staff, given that the proposal meets the DPA 3 guidelines, staff recommend approval of DP 607 subject to the conditions noted on the slide, which include the registration of the housing agreements to secure the rental units as rental housing in perpetuity, the finalization of the design of the stormwater infrastructure under the proposed building to the satisfaction of the engineering department, including agreements for future access and maintenance of that infrastructure. And then staff are also recommending giving first 3 readings to the non-market rental and market rental housing agreement bylaws. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Council, any questions for Mr. Daly this evening? I have a few. Mr. Daly, I'm curious why this proposal for this apartment building is not meeting our 20% 3-bedroom policy in either the market or the non-market or the total of the building.
Through you, Chair, the 20% 3-bedroom requirement was secured through the overall rezoning. So that was through the 4 apartment buildings on site. And it was not applied it was not intended to be applied specifically to each apartment building, particularly this one, because it is all rental units. It would be quite challenging to meet that requirement with that unit mix.
Missed opportunity. And then my other question was, I see in the staff report and the response to ADP that there's a request to reduce the step code compliance from 4 to 3. Can you just confirm that there are no fossil fuel infrastructure going in? We're kind of going in line in this direction anyways, but I just want to confirm that it's in line with the proposal that we're having with step 4 and step 3 code.
Yes, that's correct. There is already a no gas covenant registered on title that was done through the rezoning.
Thank you. And then with regards to the open common amenity area in the back, can you just confirm that that's actually accessible? I saw in the drawings that it looks like there's stair access from the north, but it doesn't look like there's actual accessibility to that back end.
Yes, it will be accessible. There's a path from the front entryway that goes around to the back that will be built to an accessible standard, and you can also access it from inside the building as well.
All right. And then what types of activations or weather protection are being provided in that open amenity space? So specifically DPA guidelines 36.14 C and D speak to activation of public open spaces and making sure that they're usable year round.
Well, it's technically not at grade, but the L-shaped courtyard on one of the main levels, that one has seating proposed for activation. There was discussion about providing covered open space there, but given that it's going to be quite shaded by the building, the architects recommended against doing that and having more open space to enjoy out there for the residents. On the shared outdoor amenities space on the rooftop, there is overhead weather protection, and it includes seating under there as well as outside of the covered space.
Okay. And then lastly, can you just speak to what sort of lighting is provided in that back end open amenity space?
There is bollard lighting.
Thank you. Council, any other questions? I clearly did a deep dive on the drawings on that one. All right, there is a staff recommendation in front of us. Council, what is your pleasure? Councillor Hamilton.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor French. Any comments on this one?
I think this this unit, particularly in the affordable rental units, this is a one building in what is a much larger development happening there at the end of Finch Drive, and I look forward to seeing this come to completion.
Council, any further comments? Yeah, Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you. Speaking in favor of the staff recommendation, I think this project, which has had a lot of finessing and back and forth and a lot of work done into it, is an example for how we can build on hillsides, and which we will be needing to do in future. And there are many things I could say about its achievements, but I'd like to focus on a comment made in the staff report. I'll quote, "A minimum color palette of green, wood tones, and dark charcoal echo the natural colors of the forest and rock outcrops. This contrast responds to both the immediate environment as well as the overall regional landscape of the Squamish Valley." I'd like to pose the question as to whether that should not be discussed and opened up. The colors here in the architect's drawings are as follows: a green, and it's a pale green, wood look, charcoal, light brown, and light gray. And in the rationale supplied by the project architect, the use of colors blend buildings into the backdrop of the hillside. Well, just a few weeks ago, we discussed a project at 1701 Centennial Way, and it uses the same colors. In fact, we're seeing a lot of the same colors all around town. And I'd like to suggest that we need to, sooner rather than later, review our design, our development permit area guidelines, and in particular 36.12, building materials and colors, and its prescription, advice, guidelines regarding color in facades, because maybe we need to open up and give the architects some freedom. Maybe without realizing it, we're imposing constraints on color selection, which we don't really need. Why do we need to hide buildings? Maybe we have enough gray days through the year in Squamish where some brighter colors might be appreciated. And I don't want to suggest this is my view, but I think it is a perspective that we should discuss and review this guideline with respect to color palettes or affecting color palettes sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Anderson. Any further comments from council on this? I will be supporting the motion on the floor. As Councillor Hamilton said, this is one of a multitude of projects that's coming forward through this rezoning for DP over time. I do appreciate that we had the opportunity to advance the predominantly affordable housing rental building to the forefront of this application. So great to see that that is the first one that's going to get built on that site, because we know how important affordable housing is in our community as well as market rental. I am a little bit disappointed that we're not meeting that 20% benchmark for the 3 bedrooms. While I appreciate that it is very difficult to build affordable housing and the dollar value or the pro formas on them are challenging, we also know that's one of the biggest components of our need are in the 2 and 3 bedrooms, especially in that affordable category. And so this is something that I'm going to continue to earmark for myself as we continue on conversations and rezonings for future properties, but appreciate that now through development permit is not the time to renegotiate with the developer. So with that, I will call to question. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right. How's everybody feeling? We're okay to carry on? Anybody need a break? Okay, let's keep going. Development permit number DP000599 for wood fiber LNG. We have Mr. Prahalad here this evening. Mr. Valeniskis online. and Ms. Wengi will be joining us at the table. And I'll pass it over to you when you're ready.
Before Mr. Prahalad begins his presentation, I'd like to take the opportunity to do a bit of an intro on the development permit for the wood fiber LNG facility in order to establish a common level of understanding and awareness when it comes to the scope of tonight's decision for council, because the scope is limited to the form and character of buildings on site. In the local government approval process, which is defined by provincial legislation, form and character development permit approval comes prior to detailed zoning bylaw confirmation, followed by a approval of building permits, which deal in more detail with the siting of structures, the structural integrity, and the proposed occupancy of each building. In this case, the approval decision in front of council is not related to the large equipment pieces and utility infrastructure proposed on site, although the renderings will show the overall look of the infrastructure and buildings. The approval decision is related to buildings that will be occupied and how those buildings comply with the applicable development permit guidelines contained in the official community plan. And this includes other aspects of design, such as lighting. These guidelines are not extensive and they pertain to intensive industrial development. So by design, there are very few guidelines in this development permit area compared to some of our other development permit areas for form and character, such as multifamily development, which council has reviewed a few permits tonight. Lastly, this is a permit application, which means that the proposed development, if it meets the applicable guidelines of the OCP, the decision to approve the proposed permit is not discretional. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Prahalad.
Thank you for that context, Mr. Balaneskis.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Vrish Prahalad, planner with the Community Planning Department. Tonight, I will be presenting development permit number DP 599 for Council's decision. This development is proposing to construct and operate the wood fiber liquefied natural gas project. The project meets development permit area guidelines for intensive industrial development and is ready for Council approval of the permit. Development permit applications associated with larger projects are subject to council approval. Once the project design meets relevant guideline outlined in the official community plan, approval of the permit is non-discretional. The subject property is located on the site of the former wood fiber pulp mill. The property is zoned I3 General Industrial and the OCP land use designation is Intensive Industrial. The WLNG project underwent a comprehensive environmental process from 2013 to 2015 and received an environmental assessment certificate for the certified project area under the British Columbia Environmental Assessment Act in 2015. An environmental assessment approval from Squamish Nation through the Squamish Nation Environmental Assessment Agreement in 2015, and a positive federal decision statement under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act in 2016. As proposed, WLNG will have the capacity to liquefy up to 2.1 million tons of natural gas per year, have a storage capacity of 250,000 cubic meters, and will export the liquefied natural gas via tankers. There is no road access and all personnel, equipment, and supplies for the project will be brought in by marine vessels. The project will use electric power sourced from BC Hydro, and gas will be supplied to the facility for export by Fortis BC. The proposed development is subject to DPA 1 protection of the environment, DPA 10 intensive and restricted industrial, and DPA 11 protection from wildfire hazard. This DP application seeks to establish the form and character of 32 buildings and equipment. These buildings and equipment will range in size from 9 meters squared to 1,050 meters squared. Buildings to the west of Mill Creek will consist of primarily administrative and operations buildings, while the east of Mill Creek will house the prefabricated modules required for the natural gas liquefaction. Where practical, the exterior building design has tried to integrate the project into the Squamish landscape. A green color palette of grass green will be applied to all exterior concrete walls of primary buildings, as well as other areas that are exposed and provide support to those facilities. This proposal is only for a form and character development permit, and the project meets the applicable guidelines for this application. The recommendation is that council approve development permit number DP599 located at the wood fiber site, subject to the registration of a Section 219 wildfire covenant on title. And that council authorize the mayor and corporate officer to execute the development permit. Thank you. At this time, I welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Perholland. Council, questions at this point? Go ahead, Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. The staff report notes a few times that approval for the permit is non-discretional. We've heard that in the presentation as well. And I wonder if staff could share with us in simple, plain English, what does that mean?
Through the chair, it means that if the application, if the proposal meets all the DP guidelines illustrated in the OCP under DPA 10, then the project is required to be approved.
Okay, and will staff share with us thoughts on the quality of the submission from the applicant? Our staff deals with applications like this on a daily basis and sees lots of them. How did this application compare to other applications received from the perspective of completeness, clarity, and quality of the submission?
Through the chair, I can speak to, we received this application in January of the start of this year. So that it's been 11 months since it's come to council for a DP decision. We've had several back and forth with the proponent to get the information that we required, and now we feel like we've received enough information to address the DP guidelines and seek council approval.
Any further questions?
I think I have one more. I'd like to hear from staff. What is the consequence if the staff recommendation fails? If the staff recommendation is ultimately what comes on the floor for council and it fails, what then?
I'll pass this over to Mr. Valeniskis. And I think the process, I think Councillor French is asking about the process if the DP fails. Can the proponent reapply?
Yes, through you, Acting Mayor, the proponent can reapply with a different drawing set. Essentially, it has to be a different application. However, as Mr. Prahalad mentioned, the application in staff's assessment meets the OCP guidelines. Yeah, that would be interesting if that was the council decision, and that would be, of course, in addition to any legal avenues that any proponent has.
Thank you, Chair. That's all.
Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, I have some questions. So at the start of the document of the proposal, it says, this document provides a summary of preliminary project statistics and preliminary list of buildings proposed to be constructed. And so it seems that this is only in a preliminary state. We're expected to make judgments on the guidelines in terms of lighting. Colors is one of the DPA guidelines and some of these things. But the proposed permit speaks to holding them to their architectural diagrams, but by the proposal's language, those aren't complete. And so we don't, seems to me, have the information to say, hey, yes, is this consistent or not with the guidelines? Because the list of buildings, like I have yet to see a DP come to us where there's just buildings absent. So how do we I guess, contemplate a DP, which it seems says it's just preliminary buildings and preliminary information?
Through the chair, the plot plan that has been submitted is the plan at this date that will move forward. And the buildings that have been submitted will be the buildings that will be on site.
If I could just add.
Go ahead, Mr. Balanauskas.
Thank you. Even though it says preliminary, it is what council is approving is not going to be preliminary. That is going to be the development permit, if approved. If the proponents decide to make changes to that site plan or the building design, they'll have to go through a development permit amendment process.
Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
But it seems odd to me that we would be contemplating approving a preliminary design, even if our approval made it sort of pretended it was final. It sort of says right there, this is preliminary. Like, wouldn't our normal process, if someone came to staff or council with, hey, here's some preliminary ideas, we'd say, okay, great, here's some feedback, come to us with the finished, with what you believe is a finished proposal. And there may be amendments and so on later, but wouldn't the starting point be what the proponent believes is finalized at this point in time?
Yes, in many cases it would be. I think perhaps when the proponent worked on the drawing set, that was, their understanding that things will change, and with any large development, things change along the way, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happens here. But like I said, once the development permit is approved and issued, it locks in the design of the buildings and the location of the buildings. So any changes would have to go through an amendment.
Okay, thanks. So move on to a new topic. In terms of DPA 10, there aren't many guidelines there, and so I'm sort of would expect a high degree of compliance because there's not a lot of criteria to meet. And I'm wondering, and my colleague alluded to it, I'm wondering if there was a problem or if we can get an updated set of drawings, because what I see, and I've seen on a few different computer screens and up here now, it's oversaturated neon colors. And we had a couple discussions about color palettes, and I think although there may be some disagreement about whether we want to change them, it seems we do have some fairly well-established color palettes. The proposal speaks to aligning with, blending in, and that was a big part of the EA process, and talking about screening and making it not impactful for the gondola and so on. But the colors that I see in our drawings seem, neon, oversaturated. And so on one of the guidelines in DPA 10, it seems that this is really not close to compliance. So how do we sort of understand that this actually is alignment with the visual impacts and what the guidelines around color says?
Through the chair, the majority of the color scheme on site will be the green that's shown in the visual quality management plan. The neon that you're referring to highlights different piping in the modules. So it's not the color that will be seen on site once the modules arrive. It's just differentiating different pipes in the modules. Most of the piping will be green. However, because of piping that will need to be cooled or heated, that green won't be able to be applied to that pipe. So that pipe will need to be a different color, which they will try to blend into the landscape.
Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
So when I look at the drawings, though, it's not just a few pipes, and there's neon purple and neon yellow, and the floating LNG storage tankers are bright neon green. And so I don't know, maybe it's just someone needs to adjust their color palette, but it's not clear to me. Like what I see presented is not in alignment at all with the colors that we normally expect from development. It's very, I would say, obnoxious. And so if what's proposed is something different, can we get those drawings that show the actual colors proposed, or is what is being proposed what I see in those drawings?
Go ahead, Mr. Pralad.
Through the chair, the proponents, to the best of their ability, will try to use that green. Unfortunately, in the renderings, it's not coming out quite as it will once all the equipment is out in the field. However, I will note that some of the piping, especially some of the neon that you do see, just because of some of the heating and cooling requirements of the pipe, it won't be that green, and it will probably be most likely a gray.
So, but we have proponents on much smaller projects, like a couple $1 million projects, where this is a multi-billion-dollar project, and they're able to present, hey, here's the colors, and give us drawings. So are we not able to ask for that and receive, here's what we're actually talking about, so we can measure it against our guidelines?
Through the chair, I think we need to go back a little bit. So these modules that will be coming on shore, they under the BC Building Code, they're not considered buildings. So they are not treated. We don't go through the same review of those buildings because they're regulated by a different regulator. So we have tried to ask that the green be applied. However, just because of at this time, like the proponents, they're not able to definitively say that the green will be applied just because of the stage they're at with the design of the modules.
So are we able then to receive a report that sort of says, here's the buildings which our guidelines are applicable, and here's what they will look like, and these other ones, it's not applicable, it's up to the province to regulate, and so we can be clear, again, as a council, that we're sort of measuring the right buildings against our guidelines?
Mr. Valeniskis, did you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you. So I think I just want to echo what Mr. Prahalat said, in that even though the renderings show all of these pieces of equipment and utility infrastructure on site, those are not actually part of the subject to our approval. We just wanted to show the holistic picture of what the site is going to look like. That out of all of the equipment, structures, and buildings on site, there are few that are going to be, they're going to have occupancy, they're going to be under the building code constructed. And those buildings are going to be that color that is included in the staff report. And also are described in the visual quality management plan, which is attached to the report, and I believe referenced in the architectural drawings. So yes, it is a little different than what we normally see, because we rarely deal with natural gas or intensive industrial facilities. It's a different, it's a completely different development than what we normally see. Go through the DP process.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Hamilton next. If we have more questions, Councillor Pettigal, I can come back to you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Valenesca, as you mentioned, should the development permit be awarded today and there's changes that get made to any of the structures that fall under the DP, that there would be a DP amendment. Can you speak to what is the process of a DP amendment and whether it's different from a DP variance?
Through you, acting mayor, that's a great question. So the DP amendment is essentially any applicant has a choice to either apply for a brand new DP if if there's significant changes to the project, or do an amendment to an existing DP. And so what we normally see is an amendment to an existing DP, and it's not an amendment in terms of amending the bylaw, like the zoning bylaw, or amending the OCP guidelines. It's just you still have to conform with the guidelines, but it's an amendment of what the original proposal was. And we see it all the time happen with bigger projects, that they have to come back and do some kind of an amendment because you find things as you start build on site, you run into different issues and challenges, and that naturally requires changes. So that process, once if council approves a development permit, if it's a minor amendment, sometimes it can be delegated according to our procedures bylaw. If it's a major amendment, there's some major changes, like there's a new building being proposed or a building being moved to a completely different location, it will come back for council for approval because the original permit was non-delegated.
And a follow-up, I know with a development variance permit and I'm perhaps convoluting the word amendment and variance here, a variance permit is, a DVP is at council's discretion. Is a DP amendment a discretionary at council's discretion, or is it non-discretionary, more like this DP?
It's exactly that. It is non-discretionary as long as it meets guidelines.
Go ahead.
And just to be clear, any amendment, any changes to the current plan would have to come before council, assuming they're not small changes to a building, or will have to come back in front of council. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. A few questions of my own, and then we can go back around if folks still have outstanding questions. There is a list of preliminary buildings, and appreciate, Mr. Perhalad, your comment that our DP guidelines don't apply to all of them. Some of them don't fall within the BC Building Code. Are we able to identify which of those buildings are applicable to the DP?
Through the chair, control and operations building, building 1, warehouse and maintenance building, building 2, administration building, building 3, storage building, building 4, and the emergency response building, building 10.
And the rest of the buildings in that list are not applicable to the development permit area guidelines are not applicable to the remainder of the buildings, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so when I'm trying to assess against the development permit area guidelines for that we have in front of us, those 5 buildings will be that green color, and we can confirm that the lighting is in line with the development permit area guidelines.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Thank you. Council, any further questions? Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, sorry. So for lighting, is that site lighting or building lighting?
Through the chair, that is building lighting.
Okay. Okay, so I'll leave the lighting for a second. The permit speaks to holding them to the architectural commitments, essentially. In the architectural drawings, I think it's Appendix 1, the architectural drawings say they will adhere to whatever applicable codes there are. But our guidelines, our DPA 11 guidelines, call out specific codes to meet our DPA 11 guidelines, BC building codes, but they're not part of the BC building code. And so how do we sort of ensure that this is actually what's being committed to is compliant with our DP 11 guidelines? Because as I read it, there's nothing that does it. It doesn't close the loop and sort of say the BC building codes as required by the architectural drawings and what's in the DPA 11 guidelines. So how do we sort of close that loop? So in terms of, they mentioned metal roofing, but our DPA 11 guidelines speak to specific BC building code classes, or I'm not sure what the word is, for fire retardants and so on roofs.
So to the chair, the DPA 11 speaks to our wildfire DP. So that only applies to the 5 buildings that I mentioned, which do have the metal roofing. I should mention that the applicants will be in our OCP guidelines under DPA 11. There is an option to register a restrictive covenant, and which means that the obligation which means that not all the DP guidelines within DP 11 need to be met. There's an exemption to put a covenant on title so that you don't need to meet all the guidelines. The proponents did provide a wildfire report, which was reviewed by the Squamish Fire Department. And after they had reviewed that document, they did not have any issues. They did not see any glaring issues with that report. And that report was also reviewed by our environmental department because our tree permit bylaw supersedes DPA 11, and they also did not have any comments on that wildfire report.
I'd also like to clarify that DPA 11 is a delegated development permit. It's not something that council has discretion over. Go ahead, Councillor Pangill.
So I appreciate, I heard the comment that green they'll try to use that green on the 5 buildings. When I look through the pictures again, there's almost no pictures of the buildings we're supposed to be evaluating. They're all of the stuff which it sounds like we don't have an ability to decide. So what green are we talking about? And are there any clear pictures in this that sort of show that green in context? Sort of understanding we don't get to speak maybe about the storage tanks and so on, but those 5 buildings, like where's the green we're speaking about?
So that green color palette, there is a sample in the visual quality management plan. And in the architectural plans, there are drawings of what the buildings look like. However, the renderings that we got, that green wasn't quite popping. It was kind of coming out more of a gray in the renderings, and so it doesn't quite show how it will look like in real life.
Councillor Pangill.
Yeah, so there's a number of things too in what's proposed, like some of the accessory buildings, and they're labeled as accessory, are not compliant with the zoning for the area in terms of height and so on. So where or how do we address zoning inconsistencies?
Through the chair, could you highlight a specific building that you're referring to?
Yeah, it's one of the accessory buildings. Find my note here. Do you happen to have the page of the list of the preliminary list of buildings? Thank you. So it was, and just as a general principle, because there's, the zoning speaks to building vibration and noxious, toxic emissions and so on, and glare impacting adjoining properties or going onto adjoining properties. It's not very clear on what the objective measure is, but that's a zoning thing. And so all of these sorts of zoning things, where or when does that get dealt with if we have concerns or would wish to actually specify what the expectations are? Where does that get addressed?
Go ahead, Mr. Valeniskis.
Thank you. The section of the zoning bylaw that I think Councillor Pettingill is referring to deals with operational issues that arise after construction. So the as proposed, there is no indication that this is going to cause an issue at this time. However, if it does cause an issue later on, that is something that we would have to deal through the in a post-construction stage. So those zoning restrictions in the I3 zone, they don't apply to the development permitting process.
Your mic is off.
Thank you. And just so one, I just picked one as an example, but the emergency response building, it says accessory non-occupied. And so I assume we accept that that's an accessory building, is 4.9 meters proposed. I think our bylaw says 4.65 as the height. I didn't go through, again, it said it was a preliminary list, so I didn't go through this exhaustively, but where there's these incompliances, is now the time to deal with that, or is there a different process that deals with these sorts of things?
Through the chair, in section 35.10 accessory buildings C, notwithstanding section 4.4F, no accessory building shall exceed the height of 9.14 meters.
I think what Mr. Perhalad is referring to is that there's specific regulations to accessory buildings in the zone itself. So this zone allows for larger accessory buildings.
I think the question at hand then is staff have reviewed the application against the existing zoning and believes that what is being presented is in line with zoning and also meets the development permit area guidelines for this industrial site. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Council, any further questions at this point? I'm not seeing any. We do have a staff recommendation before us that is at the pleasure of council. If anybody would like to move it or move something alternate. Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor French. Anybody like to speak to it this evening? Go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Excuse me. I think that it's my assumption that with respect to colors, that the wood fiber LNG organization is likely, and I'm not going to tell them to do this or assume this, but likely they're going to try to be humble. They know our context. They know our interest in Howe Sound. They know our tourism interest across the Sound on in the gondola operation. However, and I'm just going to be mainly echoing staff in my following comments, but with respect to applying development permit area guidelines, I think we have to bring a different perspective than we do with residential or commercial buildings. This is a large-scale, complex industrial facility. There are different circumstances, and one of them is that this facility may have to be adaptable in future. This is something that I learned in visiting the LNG facility in Norway at Hammerfest, is that they learned, and it wasn't exactly predicted, that they needed to have an adaptive facility. They needed even to bring back their workplace accommodations because changes, improvements, process things within industry are going to require that. Where they don't, it's not a scenario we look at in residential complexes. So I think that we need to focus differently and with less emphasis on details of buildings and elements of what we normally would apply in other types of buildings. And our focus should instead be on a well-performing, safe facility complex and a safe workplace. And therefore, we should also be interested in the guidelines and codes being applied by other agencies to the wood fiber project. We have an interest in seeing that this project that our local workforce will be working at is going to be safe, that the facility will perform well, and in performing well, it will need to be adaptive, and it will need to come back with variances in buildings and structures there, either to us or to other agencies. So this is just a perspective, and I'm only echoing what we've heard from our staff regarding the circumstances of this particular application. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a list. I'll go to Councillor French, Councillor Pettingill, Mayor Herford, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. And just briefly speaking in favor of the motion, I'll take this opportunity to point out that we don't have a tax agreement with this proponent, and I think it's long overdue that that particular task gets completed.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to support this. It's the main thing for me at this point is it's very explicit that this is a preliminary list of buildings. I've never had a DP come forward and say, here's the preliminary idea of our buildings and evaluate the color and the lighting and all the requirements against what is only a preliminary list. I understand in the future things may change, but give me the final list at this point in time. And if this is that and you just need to rewrite that paragraph, then so be it. But for me, it's not clear that I don't want to sort of give approval for something vague and nebulous. You know, our guidelines are already pretty lax and open here. And so I think asking for some specificity and clarity is not unreasonable. I do not see the green. I looked through the diagram again. All I see in the pictures, it's black and white architectural drawings for the buildings that we apparently do have discretion over, but I don't see the colors of those buildings clearly identified. And so, you know, that's one of the guidelines. I would like the opportunity to evaluate against that. And I do note, and again, it's not clear to me whether or not this would be the time to address this in the DP or not, but both online and the copy of the zoning bylaw I have accessory buildings at 4.58 meters. And so I don't know if something is out of date online and in my package, and how or when we resolve if there are height differences. That's maybe a smaller concern, but for me, that is also an unresolved thing. And I just feel like this is an unfinished package, and it's hard for me to, you know, I won't at the end of the day probably have as much discretion as I would like, but I would at least sort of like to understand, like any other proposal, these are the colors, this is what it looks like, these are the things that you have discretion over, and it's very clear, and it's final, at least as final as it can be at this point in time, and then we can make that decision.
Thank you for your comments, Mayor Herford, then Councillor Hamilton. You're on mute, Mayor Herford.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Sorry. I find the development permits quite challenging as an elected official, where we're in a position where I know the term that's been used today is approval, and that's what it is. But really, we're being asked to confirm staff's assessment, and they've done a technical assessment of the zoning, all pertinent regulations, including what's required directly for this DP. So at this point, I'm comfortable confirming staff's assessment and approving this DP. Now, I think that it's quite easy for maybe members of our community to think that systems work differently or should work differently than they do. But in this case, we do not have the discretion to deny when something does fit the guidelines of the DP. So I will I'll be voting reluctantly in favor and confirming that the DP guidelines have been met by this proponent.
Thank you for your comments, Mayor Herford. I'll go to Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. I think that it's really important that we respect the authority that's been delegated by the province to the municipality. It's important that we respect our own guidelines, our own policies, and our own OCP. It's important that we respect the expertise of our staff who have worked on this for almost a year. Even if we disagree with the principle of a project, the purpose of a project, or all of the outcomes that may come from a project, when they meet our guidelines, when they meet our policies, we have a responsibility to follow those policies. So with that, I support this non-discretionary choice.
Thank you. I will also be supporting the motion on the floor to approve this development permit. While I appreciate some of the concerns that were raised in particular by Councillor Pettingill in terms of some of the challenges with the application, there are architectural drawings for the 5 buildings that our DP guidelines actually apply to. And so I do think that it is reasonable with the information that we have in front of us to assess those buildings against the DP area guidelines that are broad in nature in order to be able to support industrial uses more broadly across our community. I think we often ask this proponent and many proponents for additional detail. In this case, it's actually created confusion by having more context of what buildings will be on that site, but perhaps are not applicable to this DP. So I, for one, despite finding it challenging, also appreciate the additional detail that it has been provided in terms of what that site might look like over time. I think the use of the colors is one of the areas where that is the most challenging in this application. It says at one point that this is the green that's going to be used, and then those colors are not used consistently throughout the application and the diagrams. And in some cases it's blue, and in some cases it's neon green. But I think our development permit process gives us certainty that we are locking in the 5 architectural drawings that are there, the green that is within the visual quality management guidelines, and the other components of our DP area guidelines. And so I feel confident in the process that we have in order to support this DP at this point. I will call to question. Any opposed? Councillor Pettingill opposes. Motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, we're getting close. Is everybody okay to keep going? Would people like a 5-minute break? Keep going. All right. 10A1 is a district housing agreement for 37781, 37790 2nd Avenue Market Rental, number 3005, 2023. This was the presentation that we just had for a DP. Anybody willing to move that? Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by myself. Any comments? Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Now, before I move the next two, no, you're right. We don't have. Okay. The next one is the District of Squamish Housing Agreement Bylaw 1050 Finch Drive, non-market rental, number 2996, 2023. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. And District of Squamish Housing Agreement Bylaw 1050 Finch Drive for the market rental, number 2997, 2023. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by myself. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Council, we don't have any late agenda items this evening. Nothing under correspondence action requested. Nothing under correspondence referred from consent agenda. No approval of minutes referred. Any business arising from the minutes? Not seeing any. We don't have any committee reports. Council, any notice of motion this evening? Not seeing any. We do have a rise in report from council staff in camera announcements. That's just there. We don't actually need to move it, but it's there for information. We didn't have any unscheduled public attendance this evening. Open question period. So this is a clarification from anybody in the audience related to any of the agenda items that we spoke to this evening. Anybody have any questions? Clarification? Andrew? No. All right. Council or staff announcements? Anybody have anything that they'd like to chat about? Go ahead, Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to share that I attended on Thursday, October the 26th, the SOAR party. This is the Sea to Sky Outdoor Recreation Innovation and Collaboration Space, which is located in the business park. It was a party. It was a great party. And it gave the community an opportunity to understand what it is, and the space will provide physical and virtual space to make it easier for businesses to meet, share resources, skills, and relationships to develop and scale and further cement Squamish's reputation as a world leader in the outdoor recreation industry. So they have a bunch of tools and various items within the space that can be used by people in this sector so that they don't necessarily have to own that equipment, but still have access to the tools that they need. So great opportunities at the space. It was a great party, and I think that this has great potential in Squamish.
Thank you, Councillor French. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, a couple things. I'm sure, I think many of us, or if not all of us, had spent coffee with the council we spent it with some of our constituents. So it's really great opportunity as usual to hear some different perspectives. The one I attended with Councillor Hamilton, it was actually kind of nice to hear a fair bit of focus on accessibility. And that is, coming partly out of our idea committee, but also community members are really pushing to see Squamish become a more accessible place. And it's actually exciting to see some of the ideas and changes and things that people are pushing for. One other thing I wanted to mention, we had an invite to attend a Benai Brith speaking, or I guess a call touching on some of the situation that's going on in Gaza, in Israel. And, it's not normally council's, or not really ever council's area of jurisdiction or authority, but I felt, we have members of different communities in our community, and so I think it is important from that perspective to have some understanding of what's going on and to hear some of the discussion. And we are seeing, unfortunately, it actually predates this, but rising levels of hate in North America, at least in right-wing governments and so on. And it is an interesting discussion. You can see the feelings are really quite raw. There's a lot of fear and concern, I think quite legitimately. But it also strikes me that we're quite a ways away on many topics. And it's a really challenging time. So I guess the only thing I'll say coming out of this is really thinking about the importance of checking in on your neighbors and making sure that everyone knows that they're important, that they are part of our community, and we're wanting to find ways to take care of and support everyone regardless of your background.
Thank you for those reflections, Councillor Pettingill. Council, any further updates? Mayor Herford, anything from Japan? Go ahead.
Wrong button. There we go. Hello, everybody. Yeah, over the last week, I've been with Councillor Greenlaw, and I have been with our sister city in Shimizu, Japan. And there'll be a presentation to council to really more fulsomely tie this or brief everyone on what happened. And the hosts were amazing and gave us great insight into the community, and we were able to celebrate with them their 60th anniversary. so of their being incorporated as a town. And the reception was amazing. Everyone from elementary school had an opportunity to witness, go to an elementary school to see what an elementary school is all about, but also to see a grade 4 English class. And later in the trip, there were some high school students that were guiding us through their main park. And of course, the ceremonies were amazing. And it's really interesting to see just different, not just different government structures, but different societies and way of being, really grappling with a lot of the same things that we do, and so I have lots of learning, and it was an amazing experience. So I'll put together a fulsome report with some photos and video to brief everyone on, and share that with the community. But it's been a really eye-opening experience. Thank you.
Thanks for the report, and thanks for joining us today. You have the benefit of it being the middle of your day instead of 9 p.m., which is perhaps the benefit. Yeah,
Well, let's
go
do.
ahead.
I got one more thing. Just while we're, hold on, if I do this right, just give me a quick second. I'm going to. Sorry, I want to. One of the things, I'm in Tokyo, and this is the size of a hotel room. You can see the whole thing. That's it right there.
Not much space.
It's pretty tight. It's pretty tight. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. I have a few updates as well to share. Last week on Thursday, I had the pleasure of, as acting mayor, to participate in the district's Long Service Awards. So this is an annual recognition of folks who have served 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years of service. It's always a great celebration, and important to take some time to reflect and celebrate those who continue to serve our community and this organization. In particular, this year, there were 6 folks who were recognized for over 20 years of service. So Arlene Rattray and Dan Arnold were recognized for 20 years of service, Renee Herford for 25 years of service, and 3 folks for 30 years of service. So Rosella Bianco, Edward Doctor, and Alana Schultes have all been with the district for 30 years, which is pretty incredible. So I just want to call out them again and thank them for their continued service to our community, to this organization, and to the incredible knowledge that they continue to hold when you have been with an organization for that long. It's almost irreplaceable. On Friday evening was the Business Excellence Awards put on by the Chamber, another great community event to recognize the amount of innovation and entrepreneurial endeavors that happened throughout this community. And there were some really amazing folks who were nominated, and congratulations to everybody who was nominated and all the winners across all the categories. Last Wednesday was our second Youth Council meeting, and one of the things that they are looking to pursue this year, so last year you folks may remember that they did the Bears Den event, which was a big event at the end of the year, and they were able to allocate kind of larger amounts, which they'll probably do again, but they've also decided that they're going to do kind of a Cubs Den version, which is a smaller scale down version, where they can do $1,000 or less projects that they're going to come up with from folks from within Youth Council on key areas that they feel passionate about, where youth could use a little bit of support. And so they are currently coming up with those ideas. And at our next meeting, which is the first Wednesday in December, they'll be pitching what their ideas are and the budget that they'll need. And they would love council to be able to join and participate. So if you are available that Wednesday, they'd love to pitch their ideas and hear your feedback or any questions that you might have. I also just want to touch on the province came out with an announcement last week. They tabled provincial legislation on small scale multi-units and a change to public hearing requirements that are forthcoming within the Community Charter and Local Government Act. There's definitely been a lot of press coverage on the small scale multi-unit component of the legislation, which will likely require fourplexes on all single family lots, up to sixplexes on things that are close to frequent transit. That frequent transit definition is still yet to be defined. And they also reiterated or announced $51 million to be distributed to local governments through municipal affairs on a formula that still be determined in order to help support local governments implement some of this. I think one of the things that has gotten less attention but will probably be more impactful over time, and especially is a place where our staff are doing some additional due diligence, is it requires that OCPs be updated every 5 years. Anything that would be consistent with the OCP that is residential primary, that would then waive any future public hearing related to that. So as long as it was consistent with the OCP, there would no longer be a public hearing. So details on what that actually means, the reality of updating our OCP in time, that staff are just kind of doing their due diligence on what that will look like. The regulations to support this legislation will come forward after the legislation receives royal assent. So they're expecting that will probably be in December. So we'll have more information as the year closes out on some of those definitions, but just wanted council and the community to be updated on where the province is at in terms of implementing that legislation. And finally, I did want to just share with everybody, if you haven't seen the news, the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District did announce their new CAO. So we've been through a process of trying to find a new CAO ever since Mr. Dalton left us a few months ago. We've had a fabulous interim CAO from Nikki Gilmore, but we are also really excited to announce that Heather Paul will be joining us as CAO for the SLRD. Some of you may know her as a common name in the corridor. She's lived in Whistler for over 20 years, and most recently has held the position as Executive Director for the Squamish-Lillooet Cultural Center. So a phenomenal leader in the corridor, and I think it will be an excellent addition to the organization up there. Those were all my updates. Anything else from council? Not seeing any. We don't have a motion to close this evening, so motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Mayor Herford. Very quick, all the way from Japan. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, council, community, and staff for supporting us this evening, and have a wonderful Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody. Konnichiwa.